Thank you for finding your seats. I do have one addendum to our last item, agenda item. There is a letter that we were all given from the Chief Student Services Administrators Association as a comment to our last item that will be entered into the record also. And we are now on agenda item 3.3, a presentation from Chancellor Charles Reed on California State University Educational Leadership Program and recent developments in community college transfer. Welcome, Chancellor Reed, and as a quick introduction, last Tuesday was a very historic day. The three segments of higher education were together in the Capitol, and in honor of that, we have a very short slideshow to show, if it's ready, and we're showing it because Chancellor Reed is in about half the pictures also. So we need the lights down just a little bit, and we'll watch some pictures, and then the floor is yours. And it's a silent slideshow.
And the popcorn is where? Oh, Lance. Maxwell's smart.
Like Barbara back there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Remembering the historic event. Chancellor Reed, welcome.
Thank you. I saw many of you there, and I will have to say that that was, I think, a very successful day for all of higher education in California. I know that there were about 300 folks there, and a lot of them said to me that they had optimism when they left, and we haven't had a lot of optimism lately. So I, appreciate the cooperation and the partnership between the community colleges, UC and CSU. I said this to the governor. Somebody asked me a little while ago, how long have I been chancellor of the CSU? And I'm into my 13th year. That doesn't happen very often, as you all know. They shoot chancellors, but I've been wearing a flak jacket, so they haven't realized that. But I said to the governor that in my 13 years, these last 18 months or so have been the very best since I have been in California, as far as communications, cooperation with the community colleges and with the UC. The three of us probably talk every couple of weeks, or every week. At least one of us talks to the other. And so I can just tell you as a board, it really works to have the communications as open as we've had. We've also been on the road together. We have appeared from San Diego to San Francisco, LA, Sacramento, and other places in between. And I think that's important too, that we show the flag together. So, thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation to be able to come today. I have spent a little bit of time with the Community College Board. I was saying to Benita, I can remember being in San Diego, talking to the board about transfer. Didn't get very far, but anyhow, I raised the issue in Los Angeles and here. I know you all know this, but you as a board ought to consider yourselves lucky, successful, on top of your game. And the reason that I say that is because of your leader, Jack Scott. I have tremendous respect for Chancellor Scott, Senator Scott, President Scott. I consider to be a very good friend, but even more than that, I consider him a mentor. I consider him a visionary. I consider him a leader. And I have known a lot of folks in the community college business for many, many years. And I would say that Jack Scott is one of a very few national leaders in community colleges. And you have him as your leader. So, you are most fortunate as a board. Also, I can tell you this. I want Jack Scott on my team.
We're not letting him go.
Yeah. Well, they say, if you're going to pick somebody to be in a foxhole with you, I want Jack Scott to be in my foxhole. I want Jack Scott to have my back. And we have worked together for a long time, the 12 years that I have been in California. But I consider Jack Scott a good president. I consider Jack Scott a good legislator and a good chancellor. And I can only say this: if all of the legislators in California or in other states were like Jack Scott, we would not be in this position that we're in today.
Sure.
He's an independent person. He's not somebody that has his mind already made up when you go to see him. He's a person that will listen, but then he's also a person that has his own convictions, and he'll let you know that. I, first went to Jack Scott when he was a legislator because I had come to California from Florida. I had been a chancellor in Florida for almost 14 years. I had been on the dark side for a while in Florida. I was the governor's chief of staff when a guy by the name of Bob Graham, who became a United States senator, chaired the Intelligence Committee for many years. But I was Bob Graham's chief of staff, and before Bob Graham, I was Reuben Askew, who was the governor's chief budget officer. So I had been around education for a very long time. And when I came to California, it intrigued me a couple of things. One, very few people that were in leadership positions in the public schools, whether it was in county offices, whether it was in school districts, whether it was high school principals or elementary school principals, whether it was curriculum leaders, had an education doctorate. When I started to talk with Jack and others about community college leadership, Jack was already working on the problem when I got here, but he didn't disagree with me that access for a community college leader was very difficult to get an education doctorate. If you were in California, you almost, unless you were very wealthy and wanted to go to USC or someplace like that, you almost had to quit your job, go on food stamps, go to school between about 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 in the afternoon if you were going to get an education doctorate. Well, a colleague of mine who had been with me in Florida, a guy by the name of Dave Spence, Jack knows Dave, we started to gather some information. And what the information said to us was that on a per capita basis, on a student basis, on any way you wanted to measure it, fewer people in California had a terminal degree in education. Well, there must have been a reason for that. So, I knew when I came here that the California State University was prohibited from offering doctorates unless they cooperated and had a partnership. And the only partnership that I really knew much about was a partnership between San Diego State and the University of California, San Diego. And that was pretty much it. So I started to ask questions about, why is this? Well, Jack explained it that it wasn't possible to quit your job. These jobs in education weren't the highest paying jobs in the state. Many of the folks were leaders of color. They had families, and it was just impossible for them. Now, to Jack's credit, he wanted to run around the end and get some private schools involved because he was desperate, I think, to try to figure out how can I help people get a doctorate. Well, the long and the short of it, I went to bat and we got a bill passed. And this is before the Senate Bill 724 that Senator Scott sponsored. I got a bill passed, and it was just flying through the legislature because members of the legislature, the caucuses, really understood. The African American, Latino, Asian caucuses really understood that there wasn't any access for people. Well, I got a call to come to the governor's office. Gray Davis was the governor. And he said, Charlie, I know you can pass this bill, but he said, I'm going to veto it. He said, Clark Kerr was just here yesterday, and he said the world will come to an end if CSU, gets a doctorate. So, I'd worked for a governor before. I understand what the big V stands for. So we didn't, go any further. I didn't want anybody to veto anything. So we stopped. Well, unfortunately, Clark Kerr passed away. So I went back right after that to see Senator Scott. And I said to Senator Scott, would you, author a bill to make it possible for the CSU to offer a doctorate? And he said, absolutely. And we just went from there. Now, that was in 2005. And I will have to say that Senate Bill 724 went flying through the legislature. There were a total of 2 votes against it. And one legislator has never voted yes for anything. Now, that's true. And I don't think he's a member of Congress today. I'm not going to tell you his name. But he still hasn't voted for anything. But anyhow, but Senator Scott's bill was better than the bill that we originally drafted that ran into trouble. And the reason is Senator Scott's bill said, Charlie, you need to involve the K through 12 and the community colleges. Benita has been an advisor to the CSU since its inception. But you need to make a part of your university's community college faculty to do the instruction. They're on the front line. The same thing with K through 12. They need to be a part of the instruction. But not only that, as he said, Charlie, ask the community college people to help you design the programs, and ask the community college folks and the public school folks to help you recruit, identify, mentor the kind of students that will enter your program. Well, I will have to say, with that kind of advice, we have followed that. And I think that we have some of the strongest programs in the country. The University of California now supports what CSU is doing. Now, they didn't at first, and that was okay. At first, they wanted to be critics. Now, as Jack says, and I'm just going to say it the way it is, they didn't want to do it, but they didn't want anybody else to be able to do it.
Right.
That's not fair. But they hired a friend of mine from Teachers College in New York to come out to be a critic of our program. And I said to him, I said, you're welcome to come, but I don't want you to come before we've designed the program. So he came out, and lo and behold, he ended up writing a paper saying that this was the most advanced degree. It was visionary. It involved the constituents, and that other doctorate programs around the country ought to copy what the CSU's doing. Now, that was because of Jack Scott's vision. Today, we have 8 of 11 campuses. We have 11 campuses that are offering the doctorate, and 8 of those 11 offer the doctorate in community college education. Now, I would have, hoped at this time that we would have been closer to 17 or 18 of our institutions, but because of the budget constraints, the one thing that we are not going to do is we're not going to offer these programs without high quality. And so we've had to take a time out in San Jose and a couple places that are going to come back online, we hope, next year. And so we'll expand the program to include about 18 different programs that will offer educational leadership for the community colleges. But today, in the community college programs, CSU Fresno, Fullerton, Long Beach, CSU Northridge, Sacramento, San Diego State, San Francisco State, and CSU Stanislaus. So we're positioned pretty well to provide access or close-by programs for students. This year, we have 243 candidates preparing for community college leadership roles. And we have about 330 students preparing for K through 12 leadership roles. So that's pretty close. 150 candidates entered in 2007, where we only had 4 programs. Now, I said at the time, Senator Scott, we're going to start slow. We're not going to, not have quality, and we're going to take our time to plan the very best programs. Of those 150 students that entered in 2007, and that was after 2 years of work to prepare those programs, 60 of those 150 students are community college specializations. And they are, as we speak, completing their 3rd year. And this spring, in this month of May and June, those students, almost all of them, will earn their education doctorate for the first time. And those students that don't finish in May and June will finish this summer. What I liked about these students is their diversity, and it was exactly what we said to the legislature. 25% of the students are Latino. 15% of the students are African American. 8% are Asian. 2% are Filipino, and 49% are Anglo. Now, the other thing that was important was for us, CSU, to keep these programs as affordable as possible for these students. The one thing that we put in the bill, and we worried about this, was that we could, the CSU, charge the same fee as the University of California charged for their students getting a doctorate. Now, I can tell you, this year, the fee for 12-month period is $12,954. However, if you are going to the University of California, you would be paying $15,363. So we're, a little below, and we're always going to be a little bit below University of California if we can possibly do it. We also provide financial aid to some of those students. Now, The CSU Education Doctorate, as I said, is based upon a deep partnership with the local community colleges and with the local schools. And we want this to be a practitioner's degree. We want people to be able to go out there the day after they get their degree and contribute back leadership to their community college and their school district. One of the best things that we've done is to ask other practitioners to help us recruit and identify these students who are potential leaders in their community college or their school district. Now, the other thing that we're really proud of is the persistence rate. Fewer than 3% of all the students since 2007 have not stayed with the program. That is phenomenal. That means that these students are hungry, the students like the program, and are working hard. Now, one of the reasons that they like the program is the way the program was designed. It was designed as a cohort of students moving through the program together. And as that cohort moved together, what we've tried to do was to encourage there to become communities of learning so that they shared problems and solutions, so that they worked on their programs, their papers, their studies, their research together in these cohorts and these learning communities. And we think that feature of that program about active problem solving has been very successful. Now, the other thing that we have tried to do is to make sure that these programs are delivered at times that are convenient and helpful to the students. So that means that we hold almost all of our classes at night. If not, we hold classes on weekends, and we're able to bunch weekends together where you might have to go for 5 or 6 hours on a Saturday and a Sunday, but maybe over 4 weekends you can do 3 or 4 months worth of work. And students tell us that they like that. They can plan around their families, their professional responsibilities to do that. And we also offer a big part of the program in the summertime, and they like that kind of concentration for their full-time study. Let me just say we will continue to expand our programs. This next year, I know San Jose is going to be coming online and some of our other institutions. I am really looking forward to commencement this year. I have been invited to 3 different commencements where students will be hooded for the first time in awarding the education doctorate degree. The other thing that Chancellor Scott knows is some of the community college students are doing studies on how the community college bill got passed. Now, that'll be good reading for some of you because it was fun to do that. We had an Army that was willing to come to Sacramento to work with Senator Scott and his staff to see that we touched all the legislators that we could, and so that they would understand. And we have tried to go back to those legislators and be accountable, especially to the caucuses, so that they knew what was going on. So, Senator Scott, thank you for your leadership in this visionary program and for supporting so many of these students who will become leaders in the community colleges of California and the school districts of California. I want to also talk about the transfer. Is it okay if I talk a little bit about the transfer?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like for you to. Let me say just one word. Charlie, those were very kind words. I often say I'd rather be ruined by flattery than improved by rebuke. So thank you very much for those kind words. I will say this. When Charlie first came into my office many years ago, I immediately spotted there was a very savvy, brilliant man, and I figured I could work with him very closely. And so when we worked together on this bill, we did have a lot of fun. And he called all of his presidents, and I'm telling you, they got on the phone to the legislators. And I will say this, actually the president of the University of California walked the halls against this bill. But, you know, when he was up against Charlie Reed, it'd be like me being up against Kobe Bryant. It just, in a one-on-one basketball game, because Charlie knew how to work the legislators, and I had a lot of fun working behind the scenes and talking to legislators. So I felt really good about the bill, and it's just been it's really exceeded my expectations. I did say to Charlie, let's really make this a good thing. I said, you've got the chance now to offer a doctorate, and can you imagine 243 candidates? And you know, we were just piddling along here in California, not doing a lot in the way of training. And this board, one of the things that this board asked about very early in the year, said, what are we doing about the leadership vacuum in the community colleges? Well, right now, the CSU program is on the top of the list in addressing the leadership vacuum, because it's taking faculty members and middle-level administrators and giving them the kind of training that they're going to be able to use, and it's going to bear a lot of fruit. So I want you to talk about the transfer program, but I wanted to interrupt and say that it was very kind of you to say all those things, but the reality was that I had a wonderful partner. We had a good time, and you know, a lot of times when you sort of sit back behind the scenes and do a little plotting together, well, we got to do that, and it worked very well. And I don't mind plotting if you're working on a good cause. So we worked on a good cause together. And
just one other story out of school. The governor, you know, when he told me he was going to veto it, I showed him, you know, that California had very few leaders with advanced degrees. So, you know, the facts didn't lie. So he said, well, you know, Charlie, he said, UC's been here. Oh, really? But anyhow, he said they want to cooperate with CSU. And so he said, will you do this? He said, will you get with the president of the University of California and put together cooperative programs where CSU and UC will be equal partners? All right. So I thought, you know, all right, I'll go to Berkeley first. So I got the president at San Francisco State and at CSU East Bay to join me at Berkeley. So we sat down in a room smaller than this, but they had 5 or 6 faculty members, and we had about 4 or 5, and we had the presidents. So I said, you know, what kind of joint cooperative program do you think we can put together? Well, the first thing that they said is, well, we think we could admit 5 students next year. Oh, really? So, you know, that was perfect. So I, you know, said, you know, there is no way. 5. Now, you know, I feel badly that we're not taking every student that applies to us. But, you know, we're admitting 50 and 60 at a time. But anyhow, so I said, well, that's not going to work. And I said, can't you do a little bit better than that? And this is the truth. I said, well, yeah. I guess if we had to, we could go to 8. So anyhow, that's called doing yourself in. The other thing that I was just so pleased that Chancellor Scott called me about 6 or 8 weeks ago to say, Charlie, let's you and I become partners in a effort to improve community college transfer. Now, it's not been any secret that Assemblyman Scott and Senator Scott and Chancellor Scott has known of my interest in improving community college transfer. I was sharing this a few minutes ago. I had a wonderful boss in Florida, in Bob Graham, and he was a visionary. One way he said to me one day, he says, Charlie, you know, we're never going to get a perfect transfer degree if we don't put it in legislation and put a big hammer there if you don't do it. So he did. Now, I came to Sacramento 12 years ago, and I couldn't believe the way the transfer program worked in California. There isn't any. How's that? None. Everybody is on their own. So I went to a reception out at Sac State. I was brand new, only been here a few months, and there was a long receiving line, and people were coming through and welcoming me to California. And so this very elderly but stern woman was coming through the line, and when she got to me, she said, Chancellor, are you thinking about bringing the transfer program from Florida to California and the Common Course numbering system? And I smiled and I said, well, yes. She says, it'll never happen. She said, we have chaos here and it works. Well, I, have failed many times over. Now, not that somebody didn't tell me, oh, yes, we understand, we're going to do it, and it just somehow never got done. As a matter of fact, Senator Scott I went to at one time, and I asked him to sponsor a bill, and he didn't put the big hammer in the bill, and he passed his bill, and we were all happy. As a matter of fact, I stood up before his committee and said that if you can pass this bill, we will save $100 million. Now, Senator Scott was also chair of the Budget Committee, and I wanted to go light on how much we could save in case he wanted to take it away. So I knew $100 million was way short of what we could really save. About 3 months ago, Chancellor Scott called me and he said, Charlie, why don't you get me a copy of the legislation that passed in Florida? I just like to look at it. Somebody might like to play with it over in the legislature. And about the same time, the LAO office and some other folks from here in Sacramento all decided that they would take a trip to Tallahassee, Florida. It was wintertime, so you can, generally it's pretty warm there. And they went to Tallahassee to meet with the university people and the community college people. And they came back and they called me and they just said, we are astounded at what goes on in Florida with transfer. Do you know that students are the focus of what people are doing in Florida? Do you know how important transfer is in Florida? Well, I kind of do. I put the transfer system in place because my old boss had a gun at my head, and we were able to do that. Now, I have in the past called the transfer program in Florida the almost perfect transfer system. Now, the reason that I say that it's almost perfect, if you are a transfer student in Florida and you get a baccalaureate degree, you graduate with a baccalaureate degree with about 132, 136 credit hours. Now, that's okay because even students that are native students that only have to get 120, they change their mind one or two times, and they don't graduate with much less than 130, 133 credit hours. So it's almost perfect. Now, what is even better is all of the general education is the same. Now, you can take about anything you want in general education as long as it's 36 credit hours. And there were a lot of lessons that I learned. But one of the lessons was, and I was getting whipsawed, is 36 in the University of Florida was different than 36 at Florida State. Bobby Bowden and, somebody didn't get along. But then, 36 was different at the University of Central Florida. And, I do some of my best thinking in the shower, and one morning I said to myself, well, 36 is 36, okay? So why are we arguing about what general education is? Mm-hmm. So I just went to work. Now, I had this legislation, and it kind of almost made me a king. So I just said, you know what? 36 is 36, and I don't care whatever students take. All of those 36 credit hours come to Gainesville, Florida State, South Florida, Florida International. Nobody can second guess one of those credits. If you have a C or better, all 36 come. Now, the other thing that we learned and had to figure out was the major. And the majors can be slightly different. As you know, it's a prerogative of the faculty. So if you want an accounting degree in business administration at Florida State, they still have, green eye shades and whatever. So they want you to take the philosophy of accounting. But thank God for the computer. So if you're a student at Chipola Junior College or St. Petersburg Community College or Tallahassee Community College, you can pull up on the screen and you say, I want to go to Florida State, I'm going to get my 36 credit hours, and I can take the philosophy of accounting, and it's going to count. And if I get a C in that, there's no questions. Nobody second guesses. But every philosophy of accounting has the same number. So if you're going to Miami-Dade Community College, same number as Pensacola Community College. Now, Gainesville would have to make the accounting degree a little bit different. And as they said, we're going to base this on computers. So you got to take accounting as it relates to computers. But that comes up on the screen. Again, if you know where you're going to go, you can take those very specific, prerequisites for that major wherever you want to go. And it works. Now, in California, Dave Spence and I decided that we wanted to take a peek at the credit hours that students who were community college students who transferred. Well, what we found out was that they, take about 168 credit hours to a baccalaureate degree. You only need 120. So that is 48 credit hours. Step back sometime and figure out that's years of living cost. That is 48 hours that the individuals had to pay 48 hours that the state has had to subsidize, and that's why we, fudged on the 100 million, because we knew that if we could lower that down. So if we can get a transfer student, any student in California, to graduate with 130 credit hours. Now, the degree is only 120, but, students like to change their mind. We have a lot of students start off want to be engineers and end up being business majors or whatever. But that's fine to do that. So Senate Bill 1440, Chancellor Scott, after looking at Florida, listening to the people who had gone there to see an almost perfect transfer system, said, Charlie, this is the time. The stars, the moon, everybody's lined up. Let's not waste, a financial crisis that we're in, and so let's go forward. And so, last week, our bill passed 8-0 out of the Senate committee, and I think it has real promise. And I can't tell you what it will do for students. It is student-centered, student-driven, and that makes all the difference in the world. Jack, you might want to say a little bit more about it too, because
No, that's fine. We discussed it this morning, and we got a very enthusiastic response from the Board of Governors. In fact, one Board of Governors testified that she had to repeat 12 classes in CSU, so I think we had her enthusiastic backing. And so we're excited about this, and I think and as you said, it has to do with students. And we can save the state a lot of money, but mainly what we really want to do is get students out and become tax-paying citizens, and many of them want to go on and get a professional degree or something else as well. So it's a good step in the right direction, and it's just to move away the bureaucracy. That's the main thing we want to do. We're going to take those, in our case, it's 39 units. We're going to have those 39 units that are going to agree with your CSU breadth requirement, and we're then going to have 18 units of an area of emphasis. It could be one specific subject, or it might be something like social science, and then we're going to transfer, and that means that you'll have an AA transfer degree from any community college in California. We'll step right into CSU and you'll give us junior standing, and the bill says that CSU will not require more than an additional 60 units in order to graduate, and it's pretty simple. It's not it gives a student a lot of flexibility, but it won't have this business of, well, one CSU requires this or whatever, and so we're just going to move into it, and I think it's going to work well.
Offering the AA degree is very important, okay? Now, I want to say this. It is hard if you are a student who wants to get a baccalaureate degree and you're going to school at a community college, because you're going to have to stop sometime and go someplace else to get the baccalaureate degree. So that's not easy, okay? But if you start out and you have a set of goals and you kind of sort of think you know where you're going, and you can achieve this AA degree, at commencement in Florida, they award the degree. Now, all we said was, if you have an AA degree, we're not going to question anything. All 60 of those credit hours come. All right, now, we're going to look at that, and you couldn't come and become an engineer if you'd taken all the prerequisites to, be a business major. But those 36 or 39 credit hours would all come. Now, I don't know, but one of these days, California is going to be back in the okay budget business. In Florida, while I was chancellor, we did a couple things. I was able, and the presidents of our institutions, to attend a lot of the community college graduations. I was able to get at least 20 full scholarships for an AA student, the best AA students at the community college, to come to one of our four-year institutions. And the institutions loved that. They loved going to get the best math students, the best engineering students, the best business students, to give them a scholarship to go to Florida, Florida State, or South Florida, or wherever. And our legislature did that, and it made sense. It was an incentive-driven thing. And I'm sure that we could do something similar to that, to incentivize completing the AA degree. That was so important. Jack?
Let me say something here about the AA degree. There's several advantages to that. Number one, suppose a student, and right now 50% of our students transfer with 60 or more units without the AA degree because they don't want to take those extra units.
Yeah.
That's necessary. But if you have an AA degree, if for some reason you don't get to complete the BA degree, you've got something in hand. That's going to help you. Number two, it's going to help the college. We're going to have more AA degrees from Pasadena City College, Sacramento City College. That'll help the college. Number three, those students will put it on the resumes, and that will help the college. So those are advantages. We're mainly talking about cutting down the number of units it's going to take to get a bachelor's degree, but there's some side benefits here that we needn't to forget about. And, you know, because a lot of students now, because the local campus requires 5 or 6 additional units, they just don't stop and get the AA degree. But now they'll get the AA degree, and they get the AA transfer degree, and they can go, and it'll be, they won't sit around and say, well, let's see, we can only take 45 of those units. It'll be 60 units, and it has to transfer to CSU. So it is something also that gives the community college faculty additional status.
Yes.
Because now they're saying this is transferable. We say it's transferable, therefore it is transferable.
Absolutely. And I'm going to tell you something else. There'll be a lot of doubters, okay? Now, because I experienced it. So in Florida, we set up a separate research effort with faculty doing the research. And students that came as freshmen to the four-year institutions, we called them, quote, native students for, you know, whatever. And then we called the community college students transfer students. All right, I was chancellor from 1985 to 1999, and we did the study, the research, every year. There was absolutely no difference in the native students and the transfer students. As a matter of fact, in some cases, the transfer students did better. And we were able to annually report that to our board so that there wasn't any question about the transfer degree and the faculty and the staff at the community college. And I'm talking about rural community colleges sending engineering students to Florida or Florida State. They were all good students.
I just wonder if there, we've talked about 2 different subjects here, and I just wonder if there are questions that the board wants to.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for coming here with your very busy schedule. We really appreciate it, and I feel like I've learned more about you, and I believe that you're a friend, so
Well, I
that feels
thank
very
you.
good.
I know I was supposed to be here earlier today. Jack knows this. A person that worked for me for more than 12 years passed away, and his mother, who's 96, asked me to give the eulogy today. And it's kind of like, I guess Yogi Berra said, I want to go to your funeral because I want you to come to mine.
Yeah, no, very understandable, and our meeting's easily accommodating. Any other comments or questions for the Chancellor? Member Davis-Lyman.
Thank you for being here today. And I believe within our system, and Vice Chancellor Perry could maybe talk a little bit about that, but when our students get the AA, besides the factors you talked about, could you talk a little bit about that financial? There is a huge financial gain for our students to get the AA.
Sure. We've instituted a data matching agreement with EDD, and we routinely match our student records for students who get the degrees, even the ones who don't get the degrees, both pre and post after they get their associate's degree and certificates, and generally see about a doubling of their wages. Their average wage goes from about 30 grand a year to 60. So, like Chancellor said, we miss out on a lot of opportunities. The students miss out on a lot of opportunities by not getting that degree or certificate.
Any other member wish to speak? Member Baca.
Just real quick, it's great to have you here, and as an alum of Cal State Fullerton, I'm
Go
very
Titans. Go Titans.
Titans. Two Titans right here.
Gang up on me.
You know, I think what we should do in the future is hire the three heads of the different segments together so that we can have them get along as well as you do and work as effectively as the two of you certainly have done. We very much appreciate that. But I just want to comment on the educational leadership program. The community colleges, we've gone through a real bout in terms of leadership, and there's different reasons for that being the case, but certainly, this contributes immensely to getting those leaders that we need to lead at the colleges and the districts in the future.
Did I read where there's 2 brand-new community colleges last week?
Moreno Valley and Narco, they're part of the Riverside City Community College system. We added, they'd been longtime campuses, and they became actual colleges just a few months ago.
I read that last week, and I thought, 112?
Yep, that's right.
Well, we're very appreciative of your work.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's a lot of presidents.
Member McDougall and Member Baum.
Yes, I too would like to extend thanks to the Chancellor and just say to both Chancellor Reed and Chancellor Scott that I'm sure all of us feel the same way, that we're very, very grateful for this achievement. But I think what is most important is how much it'll benefit students for years to come. So thank you both very, very much.
Member Baum.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you very much for the presentation and for your visible leadership in this issue and working with Chancellor Scott, because we at a local district where I represent too, we're having that crisis in leadership as well. The system now has got it so that there's not as many incentives for somebody to step up from the ranks to assume an academic administrative leadership position. In fact, a faculty member can often do better remaining a full-time senior faculty member financially and others. So what your efforts to help us increase the pipeline of individuals trained for leadership is going to go a long way, and we want to continue to work within our system and through your system to continue to find ways to make people want to go into academic administrative leadership. So thank you.
Anybody else? Well, thank you very much.
Can I tell one joke?
Absolutely.
Since you had, Chancellor Scott, I think you kind of mix. You have some presidents and you have some chancellors out there in those 112 institutions. When I became chancellor in Florida, I came straight from the governor's office, so, I didn't have the usual, I wasn't a chair of a department, a vice president, whatever. So I didn't know how to be chancellor. So I decided that my neighbor in Atlanta had been chancellor of the University of Georgia system for many years. And so I went up to Atlanta to ask him. I said, what do chancellors do? So he said, well, let me tell you, Charlie. He said, the most important time of the year is late summer, early fall. I said, well, why is that? He said, well, you got to make sure that all the football players are eligible. And he said, Florida and Georgia play for the national championship about every other year or so. So he says, that's really important. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'll give you an example. He says, this just happened. He said one of the big guys from South Georgia was going to the University of Georgia this summer to finish up his history, and he didn't pass his test. He said, now, Bubba was about 285, 6'11", and they were counting on Bubba to hold down the defense. So he said what happened was Bubba got this F in summer school, so the coach said, get Bubba and get him over here to talk to his professor, because we need to ask that professor to change his grade. So they come over, Bubba, the professor, and the assistant coach, and they talk to the professor, and he was a legit professor, and he said, I'm just not going to change this grade unless you can prove you understand. So he said, I'm going to give you a break. I'm going to give you an oral question, and he said, if you answer the question correctly, I'll change your grade. So Bubba said, what's the question? And the professor said, who tore down the walls of Jericho? And Bubba scratched his head and he said, well, you know what? I don't know, but I didn't do it. So the professor wouldn't change his grade. And that wasn't good enough, so they said, well, you know what? Get the professor, get Bubba and the coach, and go see the president of the University of Georgia. So they all go into the president's office, and they sit down, and the president said, well, what are you doing here? And coach said, well, Bubba flunked history, and we need to change his grade. And I said, well, what was the question? And they said, well, we just asked Bubba who tore down the walls of Jericho. And with that, the president of the University of the University of Georgia said, well, look, I've known Bubba. I know Bubba's family all my life. I know he'd never do anything like that. Well, the professor still wouldn't change the grade. So they go to the chancellor's office in Atlanta, head of the whole system. And they all march into the chancellor's office, and the chancellor, of course, asks why they're there. So they get around to it, and again, same question about who tore down the walls of Jericho. And with that, the chancellor said, look, the University of Georgia has a big foundation. They can pay for all the damages. Just make Bubba eligible.
Well, thank you for spending the time. Okay, if we have the energy, we have one more item on today's agenda before the public forum. So let us go to item 4.2, proposed Title V regulation revisions for facility space and utilization standards. Will you be presenting?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. It has Vice Chancellor Skinner. Okay. That sounds fine. Can I ask some of the people in conversation to step outside? And Jerry, could you ask the Chancellor to step outside?
Good job.
We're ready.
Madam President and members, Fred Harris with the Facilities Planning Unit and Fiscal Standards. Here to present today on first reading. I'd like to emphasize that it's the first reading of a regulation change. And I wanted to thank all of you for reading it thoroughly. I've gotten some feedback. And I know people were taking great effort to try and find where the additions to the language on the end of the item was at. And it was, sorry to say we didn't overly point out that it was all strikeouts. And the effort here today is a long-standing effort. I've been here with the Chancellor's Office about 13 years. I know this is about the 4th attempt to make a change to our space and utilization standards for facilities eligibility. In the big world of facilities, this is a big issue. These standards are fundamental for developing the eligibility for projects and how they get funded. The reason why we're here today, and again, it's a joint collaborative effort with the Academic Senate and with our office to come to you to ask for this change. These standards were put in back in 1975 as temporary standards. In Title V, there are no space and utilization standards for UC or CSU. They've deemed to be needing some flexibility to keep them up to date. We've attempted several times, and again, after reading the item, I'm sure you have to ask the question, are we getting the cart before the horse? And we tried putting the horse before the cart a couple other times, and spent a great deal of effort on getting consultants hired, studies developed, looking at similar systems, space standards, and coming up with a plan. And then for less than stellar reasons, through the review process and the administration, I'll just leave it at that, they were deemed to be insufficient because of one cost point going up. And so we've tried getting that overturned over the years, even through legislative effort, and that was not successful, again, not directly because of this, but because of the timing of the bonds and the people's desire not wanting to focus on this. So when our friends from the Academic Senate approached me and said that these standards really need to go, they need to be updated, and I said, well, I don't know how you define insanity, but I like to try to do things differently. And again, what we're here for you today is to consider deleting these standards, again, that were temporary back in 1975, so then we can go forward and develop based on, we have data now, and that we will further gather on community college experience in California and base new standards. And again, standards, I like to use the term guidelines based on those standards so they can be more flexible and more specific to community college experience. I'll just leave you with a couple examples. For these particular standards from 1975 don't reflect the American Disabilities Act types of changes that have to occur in classrooms. Don't necessarily reflect the automation that comes with computers and the need for extra space for computers. In addition, they don't reflect the current building code standards for space. And so in a lot of ways, it's been very much of a challenge to get them changed. And again, what I submit to you is that until we have the new standards developed, the new guidelines developed, and that will be a collaborative process within the system with the Department of Finance to develop them. We will continue to use what is in Title V, but again, we're looking for that kind of bulwark to be able to get them out so we know we have clearance in order to improve and develop something different. The last point I deal with you, the more important cost guidelines are not in Title V. We're entrusted to develop those administratively and update them as needed. And I beseech to you that this is what we're seeking here. We're not going down a path where we won't have guidelines and standards for this, but we need the flexibility to bring them into this century and to make them more purposeful. And I'd like our friends from the Academic Senate to speak from their point of view of why it's important.
Thank you, Fred. We appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, and you might scratch your head and wonder how this is an academic and professional matter, and why is the Academic Senate joining with the Chancellor's office here. Unbeknownst to Fred Harris, the faculty were frustrated on their local campuses because the ability to shape the classroom space and to get labs and to upgrade things such as ADA accommodation, their hands were really tied by these antiquated regulations. And so the faculty on their own brought a resolution forward that said, please work with the Chancellor's office to update. This is ridiculous. So we brought it to Fred's office, and he was very surprised to see that the faculty had the same concerns that they have been having for years in the Chancellor's office. So Richard Mann is here as a resource because his committee, the Curriculum Committee, has been charged with following through. They did follow through with the Chancellor's office, and this brings us to the item today.
I'm sorry.
So it's first reading, there's no action needed. This is, well, it'll come back in a couple months for action, but
Okay, thank you. Vice President Himmelstein and then Member Bauer.
So, Fred, what is it that you're asking for? You're asking for board direction to go forth and revise the standards?
to extract these standards and take them out of Title V, so then that we can administratively update them as guidelines.
But we don't vote on doing that, or?
Well, today, it's because this is the first reading, you need to take a regulation change in 2 steps.
Okay.
This is the first aha moment, and then we'll take the action in a couple months.
So the action would be to authorize the staff to go forth and come up with some new recommendations for regulations.
Well, I'm taking even little babyier steps than that.
Okay.
The first, what the action before the board is to change the regulations and extract them from Title V. And then we will come back in the future. We will continue using these as our operational guidelines. And then we'll come back in the future after we go through an effort and, I garner the resources, outside of this office in order to do the studies and whatnot based on community college experience. And we will come up with new guidelines as we do with the cost guidelines.
But the first step is simply to delete the existing Title V language.
That's all we're
Before
doing.
we have new ones.
Yeah.
Right.
Why would you do that?
Why would we do that?
But
I don't understand.
Well, 'cause we're not going to be doing new regulations.
So why would you strike them?
So what will be in
Why would you not do it simultaneously?
Well,
If you're gonna
because
if you're going to keep them in place anyway, why do you need to strike them?
Well, in my previous discussion, we've tried that particular route before in terms of having a conjoint effort where we have the new standards in place that were updated at that particular time. And the effort to delete the regulations was denied because of one cost point changing. I'm basically wanting to follow up on the recommendation of the Academic Senate and to take this effort and to front load the extraction first so that we know we have a clear path then to go through the effort. Because it'll be difficult for me to garner the resources within the system. Wouldn't be coming out of our office. I'd be asking districts to step up and bring resources to bear so that we could do the study. And it would be very difficult for me to do that without a clear path to, that it's going to actually be fulfilled.
But if we delete the standards, that means there's no standards.
He said they're still going to follow them
Right.
anyway.
We will still follow them as guidelines as we would after the point, just as the cost guidelines, we have cost guidelines we develop.
So what,
Why
do we need to delete them now?
If you're still going to use them.
Why don't we just give directions?
Let me just ask a question then. Are you gun shy? Is that what happened, that you tried to do it that way last time and it did not work, so now you're trying to break it up into 2 separate steps because you think you'll have better success?
Yes.
Okay, so a reality of having done it before didn't work, and
Well,
but is this way of right? Will this solve the problem that you had the first time?
No.
You still could be rejected.
It could be, but I believe that with the voice of the Academic Senate, with maybe different personnel within the Department of Finance who I've been keeping informed of what we're doing and have not heard anything negative against it, that we have developed. When I first got here, we didn't necessarily have the same reputation as we do now relative to facilities and the facilities administration. I'm hopeful that that will be enough to carry this forward.
rejected by who?
The Department of Finance.
Rejected by the Department of Finance. Okay, I'm very unclear of what you're asking the board to do. That if this ultimately is a Department of Finance decision?
Well, the Board of Governors and the particular state agency has the authority to promulgate regulation changes. Right. And so what I'm suggesting is starting that process to promulgate the regulation changes, obviously at first hearing now, take them out of Title V so that we can deal with them administratively, then we will be bringing them back to you as guidelines, and you will be approving guidelines.
So how does reading of the current standards
Excuse me,
enable you-
Member Lockyer, excuse me. I just thought maybe we'll just have a discussion. So Member Baum.
I had
let's just
a
talk.
separate question altogether. In addition to the technology and disability aspects, does sustainability drive any of the process for reviewing space needs as well?
Not currently.
Okay. Would it be is it even possible to incorporate sustainability into any of those guidelines?
That's definitely very possible. If that's an eligibility standard that you want to have for approval, there is currently a Board of Governors sustainability policy, and it's more based, rather than on a regulatory model, than on an incentive model, where you're incenting districts if they exceed Title 24 for new construction by 10%, that they get a 2% increase in their capital outlay budget.
So it wouldn't necessarily be part of Title V, it would be through the other aspects that you were discussing.
That's definitely a possibility.
Okay, Member Lockyer.
I apologize for that. So how will rescission of the current standards help you to move forward to promulgate more flexible guidelines is what you're proposing we get to eventually?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to represent is that I would have more credibility as I go out in the system to develop the new standards and get the resources to develop the new ones. We've tried that 3 different times, and they failed for less than, direct reasons. And so people are basically not going to believe me, and especially in this constrained budget environment, to want to dedicate resources in order to develop the new guidelines. And I'm trying to, with the help of the Academic Senate, trying to approach this in a different way, because we've tried first doing the study, bringing the guidelines together, and then coming to the board to, let's take them out of Title V and do the new ones, or even update them in Title V. And it just doesn't make sense when you see the other 2 systems of the higher education within California and within the country. The need for having flexible standards is something based on evolving needs, be it sustainability, be it of other mandates that may come along, changing building codes. Now there is a very much more stringent green building code, in fact. To be able to react to that and not have to rely on a regulatory updating process would make our planning efforts more sound, more efficient, and would allow for actually more sound planning at the districts. Because right now we have this gap between, in essence, 1975 space standards and what we're know as the reality now. Districts are basically building in order to get state funding for here, but having, in essence, create a separate set of planning books, planning what they actually need based on the code. And having that schizophrenia, in the very least, is a distraction, if not very inefficient.
Member I'm sorry, do you have all your questions answered?
No, but I'll wait.
Okay.
Again, I submit to you, it's horse before the cart, but I'm trying to solve a problem that's been intractable up till now.
I didn't realize it was 3 times you tried before also. Member Perez?
It seems to me that part of these guidelines also have to do with an occupancy guideline there, that they want to ensure that the space is being utilized a certain amount of time, which means that we're not having wasted space on campus. So it seems like there's some relevance of the current procedures. But I feel like I'm not getting all the information I need, and what would be helpful to me is to understand, you said 3 times you've come before and it's been denied. It would be helpful to understand what were your past barriers, because to me, to say we're going to, go forward and say we're not going to utilize these anymore, but then you're still going to use them until something new is brought forward, and yet we don't clearly understand what prevented it from happening before. I just feel like I don't have all the information I need to support that kind of action.
I understand. Well, if I might just try again, and I'll try a different angle. When we first came here, we were focusing on the library space standards. The librarians and whatnot felt that our standards for library space were very much out of date. So that particular group, brought together some funds, hired a consultant, looked at the CSU standards, brought our library space standards, which in essence were probably emanating from when we were still part of K-12 or thereabouts, did a fully articulated study, looked at, created a whole new set of standards that we were going to update Title V in. And so there was a look at, in terms of the different sizes of the campuses, there would be like 3 different types of standards based on medium, small, and large. And then there were some other gradations within each of those standards in terms of what those could be at cost. And our friends at the Department of Finance found one particular cost point that increased over time. And because of that increase, they denied the whole package. And I was unable to get any attention, at that time there was a budget tumult also, to get any attention to be able to move this forward and kind of say, wait a minute, that just doesn't make any sense. And over a couple of years continuing to try that, and it just didn't work. Separately, I thought, well, let's go to the legislature, and tried a resolution of the legislature that made its way through one house and then got stopped in another house, not because of the merits of this, but that the concern that, well, we want to focus on a bond and we don't want to really look at anything else right now. And that occurred 2 times in terms of a resolution of the legislature suggesting to the Department of Finance that this would be beneficial to the community colleges in order to change. So those were the 3 instances.
So how would us adapting this help that situation? I mean, help me to understand that, because I'm not seeing clarity as far as if we were to say we're going to, no longer use these standards, but then technically you're still using the standards, how is that going to help mitigate that situation? Because it seems to me they can still reject it.
Well, actually, what I'm saying is we will continue to use these standards. We're just going to extract them out of Title V so that we can change them and have the flexibility to update them as we do our cost guidelines.
But we don't know what the new standards are going to be.
They have not been developed yet.
So you want us to approve removal without understanding what you're putting in?
Approve removal from Title V.
Right.
But we will continue to use them.
But it seems more like a strategic move to put urgency on the other agencies. And so has there been any other thought about, I mean, I understand the strategy, but is there any other alternatives? Because the budget process will still be there, the legislative process will still be there, and I don't know if doing this will help to overcome.
I'm sorry, excuse me one more time. Vice Chancellor Skinner might have some answers.
Let me take a stab at it. I think clearly the process of this is adding a little confusion here. I think really what's central to this is the guidelines are some operating procedures that you as a board and we as an agency have full control over. And so by taking these policies out of regulation and then retaining them as guidelines, really the significant changes, it will allow you as a board to make unilateral decisions about how to proceed. So rather than it being subject to ratification by the legislature or by the Department of Finance. So I think that's really the key here, is that the guidelines would become they're more flexible, they're easier to change, again, by simply your own decisions, and I think that's what's really driving this proposal that's before you, is to get more control over setting a course, becoming more nimble in terms of our ability to set this policy, as opposed to always having to get sign-off from the legislature or the Department of Finance.
Okay, so we're removing it from Title V completely, and that will give us nimbleness.
Yes.
Okay. We have an order here. Member Himmelstein, Haley, McDougall, and Izumi.
So when you take it out of Title V, where does it go?
Well, I guess maybe they didn't think this through. What we could do is we could take all of those regulations out of Title V, and I can, for the second reading, I can develop them as a policy, and you can develop that as adopt that as a temporary policy for the time being until we come back with any kind of update.
How is it different?
Excuse me?
So we take them out of Title V and they go where?
Relative to Title V, they go nowhere.
They go nowhere,
they
but
get
they're
out.
still
They
in,
stay out.
they're still in force.
Guideline.
They become chancellor.
They become
It's
guidelines.
regulation versus guidelines.
Yeah.
It's regulation versus guidelines.
Policy and procedure of the board versus regulations within Title V.
I mean, I'm supportive of, sounds like you have very good reason for changing this, but I just second Member Perez's comments. I feel like I really can't get my arms around what we're doing here, and the legal and other parameters that we may be putting ourselves into. Not that this is any big dangerous thing. It's very, very unclear.
Well, let's have a little more discussion. Member Haley.
Thank you. I think part of it is that we're tangled up with process and how to go about moving ourselves out of a Title V regulation, which requires Department of Finance and other regulatory bodies other than ourselves as the Chancellor's office making the decisions, and with support from the Academic Senate and the other areas where the space utilization and the process is very important. I think your most recent suggestion, Fred, that maybe you bring back these in the form, not as Title V, but as guidelines, and that we understand that you're going to use these in place of the Title V as guidelines, and then you develop the guidelines, you and those that need to be part of this decision, develop them. I think we just don't feel comfortable just, I talked to you about this, drawing lines through all of them and saying, now where do they go? You know, it was very uncomfortable when we talked about it before. Where's it go now? You know, so I think we as a board just want to see them in print again in a different way, and then you're going to change them or modify them in an orderly fashion, so to speak, so that we get to be part of it. I think it's a possible way to solve the problem at the moment.
Member McDougall.
Yes. The issue to me boils down to two considerations. One of the ends that we're trying to achieve, and then second, the means that we're using to achieve those ends. I think around the table there seems to be a strong consensus in support of the ends that want to be accomplished. But the means, as originally presented, are unacceptable. I would concur for us to go without anything that this board has approved, just as somehow there are regulations out there, is not responsible for a system of this magnitude. However, I concur with Board Member Haley. I would suggest that they come back with the outline of these regulations in the form of guidelines, that we're then in a position to disapprove the existing Title V regulations, which is a major barrier to operational effectiveness, and that we then approve them and have them in place as Board of Governors guidelines. And then Mr. Harris then has the capability to go out with that. He's not gun-shy anymore, as you pointed out. He's able to go out with the confidence that the board is going to give full consideration to a change because he's no longer dealing with Title V.
Okay, thank you. That was well said. And Member Izumi.
I think that Member McDougall summarizes it very well. I think that that would be a good way for us to proceed. And then, as the guidelines would be an interim for us, and that what final product is created in consultation with the Academic Senate would then be presented back to the board again after that, right?
Yes, yes. Academic Senate and other constituencies that deal with facilities issues throughout the system.
Right.
And the Department of Finance, for that matter, too.
So the guidelines would be the interim, and we'd get a final product also coming back to the board for approval. So,
Right.
So I think that sounds sensible.
That's a very sound suggestion.
Do we need
Well, one second, Member Lockyer,
Oh,
I
I'm
think
sorry.
wanted to ask another question or comment.
I'm still, and I think that some of the other members, I think, feel the same way. I understand the ends. I don't still understand the means, and am concerned without set regulations being in place versus just merely guidelines. And I'm trying to understand the need for that difference, knowing that we've really have an advocate in the governor's office and with our current relations and legislative efforts that we could be assisting you with communications with the Department of Finance and other legislative advocates that are there for us. And so my question is, can we do that? Or I suggest we do that prior to crossing, these out and going to guidelines. I'd like to see what we can do within the Department of Finance and with our legislators. That said, is there a concern with the length of time that would take and any immediate needs that you have on your plate?
Would you like to speak now?
I'd just like to say something. I really, I think Member McDougall has made a good suggestion. The only problem is that if we have to, every time we do this, go to the Department of Finance and the legislators, that's just another, hurdle to jump. And I'm not terribly in favor of doing that, knowing that occasionally we don't jump the hurdle. And but I think the fact that we can then, in our next meeting, you can bring them, this can be extracted from Title V, it can then be adopted as a guideline. You're quite willing to do that, is that correct?
I'll do it tomorrow.
Well, we can't.
I'll do it
I don't
tonight.
think I know you can do it tomorrow, but this board can't act till.
I know.
I think till later. So how do you feel
Any
about
other thoughts?
Could I just sort of summarize what might help? I'm not sure. Really, the regulations are very antiquated and really tied to the days when we were K-12. It does not have the authority internally to make the changes, and CSU, for example, is not held to the same standards. So for the internal flexibility, it really is, the fundamental question is, should this be in Title V or should it be in guidelines?
We're saying it should.
And is that correct? Is that what was I saying that correctly there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Isn't that a fundamental question, is where should it be? And if it should be in guidelines, this is the sequence that was being recommended to effect that change. But I think the suggestion makes complete sense. I just wanted to perhaps try to summarize.
Okay,
Do we
well.
need an action?
No, this is the first reading. I think we've had a good discussion, and we'll look forward to your next report to the board.
Thank you,
coming
Madam
forward.
President and members. I look forward to the future discussion and product.
And board members, feel free to talk to the vice chancellors also about your thoughts in the meantime. Are there any comments from the public today? No. Well, I feel comfortable ending this meeting. Our reception tonight is at 6 p.m. It's at the Citizen Hotel, so it should be easy to get there. And it goes until 8. And I believe our meeting tomorrow morning starts at 9:30. Am I correct, Ann Jerry? 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock. So we're adjourned until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Thank you.